Nancy Grace Augusta Wake was born in Wellington, New Zealand in 1912. Her father left when she was still a child. Her mother, a strict and devout woman, raised 6 children alone in Sydney, Australia. Nancy grew up restless, allergic to rules, impatient with obedience. She wanted a larger life than the one allowed to girls in suburban kitchens. By her late teens, she was already working as a nurse, saving money to leave. In 1932, with little more than a suitcase and a stubborn sense of direction, she sailed to England. London became her first school of independence. She trained briefly in journalism, wrote short features, and learned to listen, not just to words, but to pauses. It was a skill that would one day save her life. In 1933, she was sent to Europe as a freelance reporter. Germany fascinated her. Efficient, theatrical, newly uniformed. In Nuremberg, she witnessed one of the early Nazi rallies. Tens of thousands marching in rhythmic unison, the banners moving like a red tide. "I saw hatred organized," she would later write, "and I knew it would not stay within its borders." When she returned to Paris, she carried with her a sense of unease that never left. But the city itself offered every distraction imaginable. The mid-1930s were Paris at its brightest. Cafes crowded with artists, music echoing through the streets, the smell of roasted chestnuts and cheap wine. Nancy thrived among correspondents and diplomats, her laughter sharp, her French fluent enough to disguise her accent. It was in this Paris that she met Henri Fiocca, a wealthy French industrialist from Marseille. He was older, composed, and utterly charmed by her refusal to be impressed. Their relationship grew quickly. Dinners in Montparnasse, weekends on the Riviera, a sense that the world could never truly end. "We danced while the world prepared to burn," she later said. By 1938, the illusion began to crack. From her apartment balcony, she read the headlines: Anschluss, Munich, Kristallnacht. The same streets that once smelled of perfume now smelled faintly of fear. Refugees from Austria and Germany arrived daily at the Gare de l'Est, their faces pale, their luggage smaller than their grief. In cafes, people still joked about politics, mourning, and for cinema tickets at night. The city refused to believe that history was real. Nancy didn't share that illusion. "You could feel the air thickening," she wrote later, as if it was waiting for the first explosion. When the German army invaded through the Ardennes in May 1940, the waiting ended. Within weeks, the front collapsed. Millions fled south. Carts, bicycles, families on foot, entire villages on the move, roads jammed with silence and sobbing. In those days, Nancy worked as a volunteer for the Red Cross. She drove ambulances filled with wounded soldiers, steering past burning fields and bomb craters. She saw the tricolour flag lowered from buildings that had flown it for a century. France was dissolving. Yet amid the chaos, she noticed something else, an instinct that overpowered fear: the need to act. "I wasn't brave," she later said. "I simply hated seeing people being pushed around." When the Germans entered Paris on June 14, 1940, she and Henri retreated south to Marseille. The journey took 5 days. At every checkpoint, she saw faces pressed against train windows, mothers clutching babies, old men holding photographs of sons already lost. The smell of smoke followed every carriage. Marseille was crowded, hungry, suspicious. It became a place of waiting, for papers, for ships, for a miracle. Nancy watched the German officers stroll along the port as if on holiday, their uniforms spotless against the dust. Her disgust hardened into purpose. "I could never accept being ruled by those bastards," she would later tell an interviewer, "so I decided I wouldn't be." In the evenings, she and Henri listened to the BBC on a hidden radio, the signal breaking with static. The voice from London promised that France was not finished. Nancy began passing messages, smuggling notes, helping stranded soldiers escape through Spain. At first it was improvised, almost accidental, a favour here, a contact there. But with each risk taken, her role deepened. The chapter of her life as a journalist was closing, another was beginning. The observer was turning into a participant. She no longer wrote stories, she became one. Her last pre-war entry ends with a single line. "If the Germans come, they'll have to deal with me, and I can be unpleasant when I have." When the tricolour flag disappeared from the rooftops of Paris, France didn't surrender overnight. It exhaled. Slowly. Painfully. The silence that followed the German occupation was not peace, but paralysis. In cafes, people whispered instead of laughing. On walls, the new posters bore the face of Marshal Pétain, the man who promised order. For Nancy Wake, it looked like obedience disguised as survival. By the summer of 1940, she and her husband Henri had settled in Marseille. Their apartment overlooked the old port, once a symbol of freedom, now patrolled by German officers and Vichy policemen. The city was full of fugitives. Jewish families with false papers, Allied pilots shot down over France, students too young to fight but too proud to bow. Each of them carried a secret. Each of them was one wrong glance away from arrest. Nancy, restless and furious, found her purpose in the chaos. Through Henri's business contacts, she met a group of people who were quietly building escape routes, lines that smuggled soldiers, resistance members, and refugees from southern France through the Pyrenees into Spain. They called themselves La Filière. To outsiders, they were ordinary citizens. To the Gestapo, they would become invisible enemies. Her first mission seemed simple: deliver messages, escort refugees to safe houses, and never ask names. But each small act of defiance carried a death sentence. "I never thought of it as heroism," she later said. "It was like pulling a splinter out of your own skin. You just do it because it hurts to do nothing." Within months, Nancy became one of the most effective couriers in southern France. She used charm as camouflage. She smiled at checkpoints, flirted with officers, and carried forged documents in her handbag, always just enough confidence to seem harmless. "A woman alone is invisible," she wrote. "That's what made it so easy to move." Her British accent often caused suspicion, so she learned to curse like a Marseillaise, to argue about wine, to gossip about fashion. Disguise became performance, and she was brilliant at it. One German guard, checking her papers, once said, "You have beautiful legs, madame." Nancy smiled sweetly. "They've gotten me out of worse trouble than this," she answered, and walked away. Every week, the risk— Nancy didn't take the nickname as an insult. "A mouse can fit where lions cannot," she laughed. Her husband Henri knew of her activities but rarely asked for details. The less he knew, the safer he was. He supported her silently, providing money, contacts, and the calm assurance she could lean on after each mission. Their relationship became both sanctuary and risk. She once said, "Loving Henri meant lying to him every day, but I loved him enough to make the lies necessary." The resistance was not one unified force then. It was a web of improvised courage. Students, priests, farmers, smugglers, each acted in isolation, bound only by purpose. Nancy often travelled alone through occupied towns, carrying messages hidden in her bicycle seat or tucked behind lipstick tubes. Her disguise as a frivolous Parisian woman was so convincing that German soldiers sometimes carried her luggage. She witnessed executions, roundups, the sound of boots on cobblestones after curfew. Yet her writing from that period remains precise, unsentimental. "Courage is not a mood," she wrote once. "It's a habit, and habits grow easier with use." In 1942, the Vichy regime intensified its cooperation with Germany. Marseille was no longer safe. Many resistance members were captured or shot. Nancy's own network began to crumble. She was forced to relocate constantly. Toulouse, Lyon, Perpignan. Each city another disguise, another accent, another name. Her new identity was Lucienne Carlier, then Madame André. With each alias she built another life, another legend. She learned to drink black coffee for stamina, to carry cyanide pills just in case. Yet she never lost her humour. In one of her letters after the war she recalled, "They wanted to make us afraid, so I laughed at them. It worked better than any weapon." Her success made her dangerous to both sides. The Gestapo intercepted messages that hinted at a female courier linked to British intelligence. By late 1942, her name was whispered even in German headquarters. Arrest warrants circulated through occupied France. Posters described her as slim, dark-haired, possibly Australian, extremely clever. In November, the Germans occupied all of France. The thin line of safety between north and south disappeared overnight. Nancy's escape routes were cut. Many of her comrades vanished, some betrayed, some executed. the walls were closing in. She decided to flee to Britain, to join half-frozen, starving, but free. It took her 6 weeks to reach London. There, the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, offered her a new kind of war, one fought not with newspapers or protests, but with sabotage, codebooks, and parachutes. Before leaving France, she had promised Henri she would return. She didn't know then that she would never see him again. Her last words to him before boarding the ship to England were quiet and almost ordinary. "Don't wait up." He smiled. She did not. London, 1943. The war had already changed its geography and its language. Cities were names in headlines, not places. Every night, the sound of sirens merged with the hum of aircraft crossing the channel. For Nancy Wake, this was no longer foreign noise. It was the rhythm of purpose. After her escape through the Pyrenees, she arrived in Britain exhausted but defiant. The officials who interviewed her expected another frightened refugee. Instead, they found a woman who answered every question with unnerving clarity. "I've seen your war," she told them. "Now I'd like to join it properly." Within weeks, she was recruited by the Special Operations Executive, SOE, a covert branch of British intelligence created by Churchill himself to set Europe ablaze. She was given the codename Hélène, later replaced by Madame André for her French missions. Her training began in a remote Scottish estate, where she learned to handle weapons, code messages, and kill silently. She was small, quick, and precise. Instructors doubted her at first, too elegant, too outspoken. Then she outshot half the men at the range, dismantled an engine faster than her mechanics teacher, and learned to parachute from a burning plane simulation without blinking. One officer noted in his report, "Hers is a temperament suited to chaos." But the training was not just physical. They broke recruits down, rebuilt them into instruments of sabotage. Nancy endured isolation, interrogation simulations, sleepless nights. She refused to fail. When a captain once sneered, "Women shouldn't be playing at war," she smiled and replied, "Darling, I'm not playing." By the spring of 1944, her orders were sealed. She would be dropped into central France to coordinate resistance groups in preparation for the Allied invasion. Her task? Link fragmented Maquis cells, distribute weapons, and organize sabotage of German supply lines. The night of the mission was moonless. She boarded a Halifax bomber with a parachute strapped to her back and a lipstick hidden in her pocket. Inside the lipstick tube was a microfilm list of radio codes. As the plane crossed the French coast, flak lit the sky in red flashes. "I wasn't afraid," she would later say, "only irritated that my hair would be a mess." She jumped. The wind tore at her clothes, the darkness swallowed her. Then, silence, and the sudden shock of ground. Shout orders louder than any man, to drink anyone under the table, and to slap soldiers who hesitated. "You can't be gentle in war," she said. "People die while you're being polite." Her men adored her. They called her Madame Fioca, in memory of her husband still in Marseille. To the locals, she was the Witch of the Mountains. To the Germans, she remained the White Mouse, now the most wanted woman in France, with a 5 million franc reward for her capture. She operated under constant danger. German patrols swept through the hills daily. Villages that aided the resistance were burned, their residents executed. One night, an informant betrayed a nearby safe house. Nancy escaped through a window minutes before the Gestapo arrived. She crossed a river barefoot, carrying a radio transmitter wrapped in oilcloth. The water was freezing, the current violent. When she reached the opposite bank, she was shaking, but laughing. "If that's the worst they can do," she muttered, "they'd better send more." Her leadership went beyond orders. It was belief. She reminded her fighters why they were there, not for glory, but for revenge, for France, for the right to live without boots at their doors. She gave men courage, one survivor recalled, because she had more than all of us. In June 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. The resistance erupted into coordinated sabotage. Nancy directed attacks on German trains, bridges, and communication lines. Her group blew up supply convoys, cut telephone cables, derailed locomotives. "We hit them everywhere," she said later. "We made France scream in their ears." When ammunition ran low, she cycled nearly 500 kilometers through enemy territory to re-establish contact with another radio operator. For 3 days she rode without rest, through rain, checkpoints, and exhaustion. The operator later said he couldn't believe she made it alive. "I don't die easily," she told him. But victory always demanded a price. Her closest allies were captured and executed. She buried their names in her notes but never wrote how she cried. In her post-war memoir, she admitted only once, "If I let grief in, it would have drowned me." In August 1944, her region was liberated. American and Free French forces advanced, and German resistance collapsed. "I got up and had a drink." But her next entry in the record says otherwise. He kept his promise. He didn't wait up. That single sentence closed a chapter not just of love, but of the person she had been before the war. The White Mouse had survived, but Nancy Wake, the woman, would spend the rest of her life remembering what survival cost. The spring of 1944 turned the mountains of central France into a battlefield that didn't yet have a name. The resistance had become an army in fragments, groups of farmers, students, deserters, criminals and patriots, all hiding in forests, waiting for an invasion that still existed only as rumour. At the centre of it, directing chaos with precision, was Nancy Wake. By then her radio name was Madame André. To London she was a critical liaison, the eyes and voice of Free France in Auvergne. To her men, she was commander, quartermaster and conscience. She carried maps instead of medals, pistols instead of cosmetics, and slept beside weapons wrapped in blankets. Her camp was hidden near Montluçon, tents camouflaged under pine trees, surrounded by mined paths and watch posts. Every morning began the same way: cold coffee, code transmissions, the smell of damp earth, and the whisper of boots moving through leaves. Discipline was survival, she said later. If you forgot one rule, someone died before sunset. Nancy managed hundreds of men, and none dared underestimate her twice. Once, when two soldiers argued during a mission briefing, she slammed her pistol on the table and said calmly, "We can argue when the Germans run out of bullets." The room went silent. It never happened again. The work of shadows. Communication with London came through the radio operator Dendon. Each night they transmitted encrypted reports, weapon drops, sabotage plans, casualties. Every second spent broadcasting was a gamble. German triangulation trucks could locate a signal within 20 minutes. Sometimes she ordered her men to move camp mid-transmission. Other times she stayed, trusting luck and defiance more than mathematics. Her group coordinated ambushes on convoys and cut railway lines between Clermont-Ferrand and Vichy. They derailed trains carrying ammunition, stole medical supplies, and rescued captured comrades from prison trucks. Nancy rode at the front, always armed, always visible. "The men needed to see I was there," she said. "It made them less afraid to die." The Gestapo hunted her relentlessly. Her codename, the White Mouse, became legend, whispered both in German briefings and resistance taverns. Posters bearing a sketch of her face appeared on village walls, wanted, dead or alive. She tore one down once, folded it neatly and kept it in her bag. "I like souvenirs," she joked. Ordered simultaneous strikes to paralyse German transport. Roads were mined, bridges blown, telephone lines cut. Within hours, central France was a maze of smoke and wreckage. For 5 nights, she didn't sleep. Messages came in bursts. Troops landed in Normandy. Need sabotage south of Loire. Hold positions. Her radio failed on the 3rd day. Batteries dead. Cables damaged during an air raid. Without contact, the resistance risked being isolated. So she decided to ride. The 500-kilometre ride, Nancy mounted a bicycle, strapped a small pistol under her skirt, and set out across German-occupied territory to find another operator. She pedalled through villages where Wehrmacht trucks patrolled, through rain, through gunfire, through fields littered with bomb fragments. For 3 days and nights, she rode nearly 500 kilometres. Once, she passed a checkpoint by pretending to be a drunk woman, late for her husband. The soldiers laughed, waved her through. She never laughed back. When she finally reached the contact point, she was bleeding from her legs, her shoes destroyed. The operator couldn't believe she was real. "I'm real enough," she said. Then, without resting, she transmitted London's coordinates for the next airdrop. That signal changed the battle. Within 48 hours, Allied aircraft delivered crates of explosives, food, and medicine to her position. Her men cheered. She didn't. She was already planning the next strike. Fire and ghosts. As the Allies advanced, German units retreated through the region. Desperate, angry, brutal. Villages suspected of aiding the resistance were massacred. Nancy saw the aftermath in one hamlet. Burned houses, civilians shot against walls. She didn't cry. She wrote. "I have no tears left for monsters," she noted. "Only work." Work meant more killing. She personally led ambushes, threw grenades, and fired machine guns. When questioned later about it, she shrugged. "If you have to fight, fight to win. I didn't have time to moralize." In one raid, she captured a German courier carrying orders from Vichy collaborators. He refused to talk. She pointed a pistol at him and said in perfect German, "I don't enjoy this part." He talked, but courage eroded differently than fear. After each victory came silence, the kind that sounded like guilt. Her men celebrated. She drank quietly in the corner. One night, when a fighter asked if she ever got scared, dead. When she returned to Marseille, she searched for Henri. She found only a grave. He had been executed months earlier for refusing to betray her. The official file said, "Death by firing squad." Nancy said nothing. She simply stood there for an hour, hands in her coat pockets, until the caretaker left her alone. Later, she told a friend, "He died like a soldier. I'll live like one for both of us." Aftermath. In the following weeks, she helped identify collaborators and disband resistance groups now turning on each other for power. She hated politics, loved precision. When asked to join de Gaulle's new administration, she refused. "I don't want to sit behind a desk," she said. "I've already had enough of silence." Her legend spread far beyond France. To the British, she was a war hero. To the French, a ghost of liberation. To herself, just a survivor with unfinished business. Her final entry that year reads, "Freedom came too late for many. I hope they forgive us for taking so long." The war ended the way all wars do, not with silence, but with noise. Celebrations, bands, flags, shouting in the streets. Nancy Wake stood in the middle of it and felt nothing. For 5 years she had lived in the rhythm of danger. Now the absence of it felt like an ache. She once said, "When you've been hunted long enough, peace is the strangest enemy of all." In September 1944, after France was liberated, Nancy was summoned to Paris. She travelled by train, her first normal journey in years. She sat among civilians clutching flowers, children singing, soldiers flirting with nurses. Every sound felt unreal. The war had ended for them. For her, it hadn't. When she arrived in Paris, the city looked the same and utterly different. The cafes were open again, the lights back on, the laughter too loud. People toasted La Liberté and tried not to look at the walls still marked by bullet holes. Nancy walked the streets like a stranger, her uniform stiff, her eyes raw from smoke and sleepless nights. She reported to the British headquarters near the Champs-Élysées. The officer in charge congratulated her formally, called her a credit to the service. He handed her a paper signed by General Eisenhower, a citation for extraordinary courage and efficiency in the field. She folded it neatly, put it in her pocket, and asked for leave to go south, to Marseille. There was someone she needed to find. The search. The journey to Marseille took her through towns she had once crossed in disguise, now free but still scarred. Every station carried posters of missing people, every village its own stories of betrayal. When she reached the city, she went straight to the port, to the house she had shared with Henri. The shutters were open, the paint faded, the silence unrecognizable. Neighbours told her the truth in fragments. Henri had been arrested months earlier by the Gestapo. He refused to speak. They tortured him for days, demanding her location. He said nothing until the end. He was executed in August 1943. Nancy listened without a word. She didn't cry. She thanked them, closed the door, and sat down in the empty living room. She stayed there for hours, her uniform jacket folded beside her, her medal still in her pocket. Later she would tell a journalist, "I knew he was dead before I was told. You can feel when the world takes something from you. It gets quieter." Medal, the Croix de Guerre, and the Médaille de la Résistance. Each ceremony felt like a mistake. People clapped, she later said, but they didn't know who they were applauding, the woman or what was left of her. The press called her the White Mouse of France. Headlines turned her into myth. But behind every headline was the same woman who still woke up at 3 a.m, expecting the sound of boots on the stairs. Peace didn't erase fear. It just changed its uniform. Her comrades were scattered. Some joined the army, others disappeared into normal life. A few drank themselves into silence. Nancy visited one in a military hospital, a man who had fought beside her in the forests. He had lost a leg and half his memory. When he saw her, he saluted. "We did it, madame," he said. She smiled. "We survived," she answered. "That's not the same thing." A woman among men. Post-war Britain was not kind to women who had been soldiers. Men were heroes, women were footnotes. When she applied for a pilot's license, the official laughed. When she tried to join a veterans club, they told her it was for men only. She walked out without a word. In her memoir, she wrote, "It was easier to face the Gestapo than bureaucracy." Still, she stayed in service as long as she could. She worked briefly for British intelligence, then as a diplomatic courier, but she grew tired of ceremonies, tired of polite conversations about bravery. People wanted stories of adventure, not the truth of loneliness. She once told a BBC interviewer, "Courage isn't glamorous, it's just stubbornness in bad lighting." The ghosts that stay. Every year on the anniversary of the liberation, she sent flowers to a cemetery in Marseille, to Henri's grave. No note, no signature, just white lilies. She never remarried. Friends said she had lovers, but never another home. Her real companions were the ghosts of her men and the endless noise of memory. Sometimes she dreamed she was back in the forest, the rain on her face, the smell of cordite, the quiet before an ambush. She woke to London's silence and couldn't tell which world was real. In her journal she wrote, "War gives you purpose, but it steals your place in the world. You win, and still you don't belong anywhere." By 1949 she began, "Isn't. It's what happens when there's nothing else left." In her official file, the final wartime note written by her commanding officer reads, "Wake, NGA, operative of exceptional ability, leadership and initiative beyond expectation, tendency toward independence extreme but effective, not suited to peacetime duties." He was right. She had fought with everything she had, and when it was over, there was no one left to fight except herself. Her greatest loyalty, to France, to freedom, to Henri, had become her punishment. In a later interview, when asked if she regretted anything, she smiled faintly. "Only that I didn't drink more champagne before it all started." In peacetime, Nancy Wake looked like anyone else. Short, graceful, perfectly composed. Only her eyes betrayed the years that refused to fade. When the world celebrated victory, she began her long apprenticeship in loneliness. After the war, she stayed in London, working briefly for the British Air Ministry. Her office overlooked the Thames, the sound of typewriters replaced gunfire. Each morning she arrived precisely on time, hair immaculate, lipstick perfect. People saw efficiency. She felt exile. "I've learned to look calm," she told a colleague. "It's just another disguise." The newspapers still called her the White Mouse, printing photographs of her smiling beside medals she never wore. She kept the decorations in a tin box wrapped in tissue under her bed. "Those pieces of metal," she said, "don't belong to me. They belong to the ones who didn't come back." A restless peace. By the early 1950s, she had left England for good. She travelled to Australia, then New Zealand, then back to Europe, never staying long. Reporters followed her, writing of the glamorous spy who outwitted the Gestapo. She hated the phrase. "There's nothing glamorous about killing or hiding in ditches," she said. "Courage smells of sweat and fear, not perfume." In 1957, she entered politics in Australia, running for Parliament as a Liberal candidate. She lost by a narrow margin. When asked how she felt, she answered, "Better to lose in peace than win in war." Her campaign posters vanished. The silence returned. She moved to London again, living in a small flat in Soho. The post-war city had changed. Neon lights, new fashions, new music. She blended in easily, anonymous, independent, nearly forgotten. Sometimes she visited the Imperial War Museum, walking past her own exhibits without slowing down. Visitors stared at her photograph on the wall, never realizing the woman beside them was the same person. Years of drift. The decades that followed became a long conversation between memory and fatigue. She drank gin in the evenings, read detective novels and wrote brief notes she never published. She called them letters to ghosts. In one she wrote, "People think peace means the end of danger. They forget it also means the end of purpose." Occasionally journalists found her. They asked the same questions. Were you afraid? Did you kill anyone? Legend. Historians called her one of the most decorated women of the Second World War. Young soldiers wrote her letters of admiration. Filmmakers requested rights to her story. She refused most of them. They'd add love scenes, she said. The only romance worth filming is survival. Yet the recognition brought a quiet warmth. For the first time, she realized her story had outlived her body. "I thought the world had forgotten," she admitted. "It seems it just took its time." She revisited France once more, escorted by veterans who saluted as she passed. In Marseille, she stood before Henri's grave, older now than he had ever been. She placed a single white rose on the stone. No words, no tears, just the wind off the harbour and the faint clink of her medals. That night, she wrote in her hotel notebook, "Love is a country that loses every war, but I still keep its passport." Final years. In her late 80s, she lived in a small apartment in London, cared for by friends and veterans organisations. Her hearing faded, her wit did not. When a nurse reminded her to take her pills, she quipped, "Darling, I've survived the Gestapo. These tablets don't frighten me." Visitors described her as both sharp and gentle, a contradiction that had defined her entire life. She refused pity. "People waste too much time feeling sorry," she said. "You either live or you don't. I chose the first." When asked what advice she'd give young women, she replied, "Learn to drink, learn to shoot, and never marry a man who's afraid of you." Legacy. Nancy Wake died in 2011 at the age of 98. According to her wish, her ashes were scattered over the mountains of central France, where the Maquis once fought and bled beside her. The wind carried them through pine trees and across the rivers she had once crossed on foot. No funeral, no speeches, just the whisper of the forest and the echo of her laughter. Her medals now rest in museums, her name on memorial plaques, but her story lives in a quieter place, in the memory of those who still believe that defiance can be an act of grace. She once said near the end of her life, "They call me brave. I was never brave. I just hated the idea of being helpless." That line remains her truest epitaph, because bravery, for Nancy Wake, was never about glory. It was about motion, the refusal to freeze, to obey, to surrender.